Alright, there's sparring videos on this channel that have specific titles. One of such videos is called Wing Chun Sparring, I think. There's one Kung Fu Sparring, Shui Dana, so punching, takedowns and locks. And then there's a supercut of me and Orsat doing a big glove sparring. It's called Full Contact Japanese Jiu-Jitsu Sparring. And in all honesty, most of those titles are kind of a bait. They're baits for discussion. And I still don't think that they're unfair in their title. I think they're very fair. But all of those videos could simply be titled MMA sparring or kickboxing sparring or takedowns only MMA sparring or whatever. And the whole purpose of those videos is precisely that, is to show that fighting looks like fighting. And what I mean by that specifically, because it sounds like a ridiculous statement, of course fighting looks like fighting, but what I actually mean by that is that when you look at all of these martial arts, be it traditional or combat sports, it doesn't matter. When you put them in a similar environment, they're all gonna end up looking pretty much the same. What me and Orsat did in this Japanese Jiu-Jitsu video, and we're Japanese Jiu-Jitsu practitioners, sport Jiu-Jitsu, we do all that stuff. What we did is, okay, let's spar freely, but let's use big gloves. That was it. And what will happen is it will end up looking just like MMA with big gloves. There's not going to be locks, there's not going to be koregaeshi, there's not going to be any of that stuff because of the big gloves. What specific rules do is they best show this specific thing that this art form is famous for. For instance, when we talk about judo, judo has double legs, judo has ground game. If you were to do judo, what the art itself actually teaches, ignoring the sport, it will look like grappling. There won't be any difference between BJJ, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, this and that. It will just look like grappling. Especially if you take away the gi, then it's gonna look like every grappling out there. But when people see a hip throw, their mind immediately goes, oh, judo. Like there's a lot of BJJ videos where somebody's like, this judo takedown is great for BJJ, and they proceed to do a hip throw. Most jiu-jitsu or BJJ people don't learn those takedowns in judo. They learn them in jiu-jitsu because it's part of jiu-jitsu too. But your mind goes, oh, hip throw, that's judo. Why? Because judo's rule set, especially now, is tailored to display, to focus on those techniques. As we said, judo has double legs. They're not using them in sports competition anymore. They're not legal. So of course, hip throws and like body lock throws is what we're going to associate with judo. But it exists there. So if you were to do a free judo sparring, judo randori, ignoring the rules, and do it with a jiu-jitsu practitioner, with a BJJ practitioner, the only way to really be able to see the difference between them, depending on how good they are, is by their preference of technique. They're going to be doing the same thing, but probably the jiu-jitsu guy will be more focused on the ground game, probably will play around in the guard, and then the judo guy is going to be focusing on the stand-up and visibly be better there. But essentially, they will be doing the same things. So what happens when you do jiu-jitsu sparring freely, but with big gloves? I'm pretty sure it will just look like that video. And this is something that is still an ongoing debate between these martial arts, because I think that a lot of people have different ways of defining which martial art is which, and which martial art does what. Because when you're aware that we adhere to principles of body mechanics that are governed by the laws of physics, that are the same everywhere, when you realize that everything will end up looking pretty much the same, because it's the same set of things that work and don't work. So then you come across a bit of trouble in defining martial arts, because then you gotta say, okay, so in reality, ontologically, both BJJ, Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, Judo do the same techniques, what is actually happening with the body mechanics there are the same things. The same things are done in Sambo, in wrestling, even in sumo. There isn't really an ontological difference in the movements of these martial arts. The biggest difference is culture and practice. If you don't spar, if you don't test it out this way, you won't be able to do it. That's just how it goes. Like, I don't care, like, high degree black belts that have never sparred. Like, that's, in my personal opinion, that's complete trash when it comes to functionality of a martial art. And the whole practice aspect of this, if we look at the Shui Da Na video, which is titled Kung Fu, but it could be titled anything. Like, I've only dabbled in Kung Fu, and I've trained Japanese Jiu-Jitsu more than I did Kung Fu. What we did there with the rules was specifically tailored to showcase more visible Wing Chun stuff and more visible, like, Kung Fu stuff. No ground game, so that we stay mostly on feet. Takedowns, sure. Punches, absolutely. Kicks, no. So that we can showcase the hand fighting. We also allowed elbows, so that we can see Wing Chun stuff. But that only happens because we tailored the rules to showcase this thing. Not because we, in our head, magically switched, okay, now we're doing Wing Chun. We're Wing Chun guys now. Nothing else. No, it's just, it all exists in one unit. But we humans quantize everything, and we define this and that. This is grappling, this is bottom grappling, this is striking, this is joint locks, this is submissions, this is that. We define all that. It all is part of one big image, just tiny puzzle pieces. You've heard this a billion times, I'm sure. Just yesterday, we did some MMA sparring in a ring at the gym. I managed to get a pretty slick kotegaeshi. That was just an MMA sparring, and I happened to be able to do kotegaeshi then. But I could title the video Aikido versus MMA or something like that, simply because the technique not only exists in Aikido, it's most of the time that specific technique is associated with Aikido, specifically, more than any other martial art. Maybe Japanese Jiu-Jitsu would be in second place. So it really depends on how you practice things, and the actual names, everything else is pretty much arbitrary. This was a little experiment, and I waited for engagement to happen, and I got a few comments and got good and bad discussions, but that was the whole point. Specifically for people saying that, this is not Jiu-Jitsu, what we're doing. This is not Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. Is sport Jiu-Jitsu Jiu-Jitsu? Is, like, the crazy Poland guys, them doing their full contact Jiu-Jitsu in gis, is that Jiu-Jitsu? If you say no, then nothing is except the actual samurai in armor with swords doing Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. By those standards, the only valid Japanese Jiu-Jitsu would be Japanese people back in the day in full-on armor. Then what's the point of doing that martial art? So yeah, that's just the thing that was on my mind, and finally got a proper engagement on that video, and I wanted to follow up with this. So yeah, I don't have much more to say. That's pretty much it. So